Well, hello again. It's been a long drought of videos, and I've gotten a lot of messages on YouTube asking, where'd this guy go? Is he dead? No, I'm not dead. Just life got in the way. Kids got older, started coaching stuff, and just new job in the process of all of this. So yes, it's been a while, and I can't say I'm going to be back on a regular schedule, but I'm hoping that since I am working on the layout from time to time, I'll shoot what I can and share what I can. So today I thought I'd share something in the process of just doing some stuff in the basement on the layout, converting the rest of the house to LED light bulbs where I can, power efficiency, saving some money. Actually, I've seen a huge drop in our electric bill, which is awesome. Almost the entire house is LEDs, so initial cost outlay is going to be big, but savings in the long run, which is awesome. So one of the things that I've found that I really like around the layout is LED strip lighting. They've really kind of come into vogue where they're inexpensive. You can get them off Amazon. I think the ones that I used were like $10 or so for a 15-foot strip. I think the entire strip is only 14 watts. Now the question is always, well, how do we power them? They don't come with a plug, and you can't directly hook them up to 110 in the house, and so you need a power supply of sorts. So I thought I'd talk about that. It's model railroad related, but it's also useful for just lighting around the house. Honestly, I've been thinking about putting them in closets, just because you can stick these strips anywhere and everywhere. And there's a lot of good how-to and DIY videos out there on what people do to create reflectors and diffuse the light a little bit. I'm using them a little bit more of a raw state, just the strip. It's in the basement, it's for my layout. I want really good fill lighting. And so actually what the light up here that you're seeing is an LED shop light, which is a little bit different, still power savings, but not as efficient as the LED strips. So let's flip over to the workbench, and I'll show you some of the stuff that we're going to need to make this work. So what I've used for all of my projects here, and I'll show you the end result of what things look like. But I've got a lot of old computers laying around. I fix up family computers. I help friends with computers, and then when they upgrade, hey, do you want this computer stuff? Sure. If nothing else, I'll just dispose of it. But I usually strip it for parts. And the one thing that I've always taken is power supplies. And a lot of times with newer computers, if it's a gaming rig, your power supply is usually one of the first things that has to be replaced because the power consumption of new video cards and all that kind of stuff. But the beauty is a 300 watt supply, and this is a mini supply, 300 watt output, but it's got 12 volts, which is exactly what our LED strips need. And this is a used LED strip I've already cut and started using throughout the layout. But this is basically what the strip looks like. So you can see it's got, zoom in a little here, just LEDs spaced, every almost half inch. There's a resistor in here for current limiting. It also has a cut line here, and then two copper pads on either side for, you can cut them to length. And so I've kind of already done that here, just experimenting a little bit. So I've got two wires shorted between two pads. All I did was just extend these, just for experimenting sake. And so I like solid copper wire. It's happened to be what I had laying around. And then to make connections, in my case, to the power supply, I've got these old adapters to go from a 4-pin Molex to a current SATA power connector. So you can just cut these off, and now you've got feeds for the different wires that you'll need. Or something similar here. I think this was a fan adapter, Molex to fan adapter. But again, all you need is these. Here's another example of just a single pin one.
So this is one alternative for powering things. For example, I just happen to have a ton of power supplies laying around. One of these supplies can power quite a bit, and we'll go into that in a second. So as I said, you'll want to pick your power supply based on the requirements of the LED strips. Now, and you want to look at the LED strip requirements to see what they require. If you're going to power an entire strip, it's 14 watts. So you have to look at the power supply, because a 300 watt supply is all of the power that this power supply can provide on several different voltages. So if you look here, hopefully there's not too much glare. If you look here, so there's different voltages. So you have 3.3 at 21 amps, 5 volts at 15 amps for 103 watts total for these two voltages. But the thing is, we don't want those. We are looking more at our 12 volt rails, not the negative 12 and not the 5. So this provides 228 watts on two 12 volt rails. That's more than enough to power quite a few LED strips. So even a small 300 watt supply like this could power almost your entire probably layout, depending on what you're doing. I've got multiple throughout my layout, which I can show you, but only because I wanted to separate them into basically switchable blocks. And you could put an inline switch into this and go that route. I've just chosen to have multiple supplies so I can turn one off, and like I said, I've got a lot of them. So one of the things with using a PC power supply is that there is a turn-on lead. Now, normally when you plug this 24-pin connector into the motherboard, that creates the short needed between the turn-on lead and ground. To bypass this, you can take this green ground lead here and do what I did here, and that's short it to ground. Now when I say shorted, it's actually just closing the circuit. So you're not actually shorting anything, but the power supply sees the turn on signal and will automatically turn on when you either plug it in, or in this case there's no switch. So as soon as I was to plug this in, provide power, fan would come on, power supply would turn on. So that's just a simple fix. You can do it however you want. Some people bridge the two pins here. I knew I wasn't going to use this for anything else. I just put a butt splice connector in there, crimped it down, and we're good to go. And then I just tie up the wires kind of just to get them out of the way. For power, when you're looking at a PC power supply, your black is ground, red is 5 volts, and yellow is going to be your 12 volts, which is what we're looking for. Now what I've done is I went ahead and trimmed up one of these Molex adapters. I can get rid of this brown connection here. It isn't needed, so really all I need is these two. And the beauty of going this route is once you've wired this up, so you've got your negative or your ground and then your positive voltage in yellow, and once you've done this, you know, there's only one way you can plug these in. You can't plug it in backwards, and the other advantage, so you can't really plug them in backwards. They're keyed. You can see they're cut or chamfered here on the corners, and this is the mating connector is chamfered as well, so you can only plug them in one way. Okay, so wiring one of these strips up is actually pretty easy. By default they will come, well, the ones that I got came with a plug on the end of them, which looked similar to this. And it had a mating connector that you could crimp. Actually, you can crimp this mating connector right onto here. So you could use this if you have a power supply that you could adapt to this. I didn't. This wasn't the route I was going to go. So instead, you can look here and you can see that there's a 12 volt pad and then a minus pad, or in this case ground. So minus and ground and the same thing. So you can cut at any point in this, and you've got a copper pad on either side that you can solder to. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to cut a small strip off of here. So I'm just going to cut here and then cut here as well, and we'll just make a strip out of this one for demonstration. Now this is a little on the extreme side in terms of solder station. For soldering purposes, you don't need something this nice. This is actually a cast off that my former company was just going to throw out. So this is a industrial level soldering iron. I love it because it's great for small projects. It's great for larger projects. This particular unit provides as much heat to the joint as the electronics in here sense that you need. So it's great to be able to work on, say, decoders and things like that that are a little more temperature sensitive versus just soldering up track, wires to track, where you need a little bit more heat. It does have a few shortcomings though, and I found while making some switches that it doesn't get the iron hot enough to really do a great job, but it isn't meant for metalworking. This is an electronics soldering iron, so you can see why it wouldn't go. So sometimes just a good Weller soldering iron would come in handy. But my station as it is here, we've got a little bit of a older style fashion here. Some people go with a new brass mesh for getting solder off of the pads. I still use a sponge. It just works really nice. Once the soldering iron is hot and your sponge is wet, you can just drag it across here and it'll help draw off any contaminants and leftover solder on the tip of your iron. The other keys to a good solder joint are using a rosin paste flux. So you can see here you do not want to use an acid-based flux. That's for copper pipes and non-electronics. Acid over time, unless you've neutralized it, is going to eat away at the joint and it's going to cause more headaches than it's worth. So a good rosin paste flux for electronics is always a must. And you can get rosin core solder, but I particularly don't care for that because I feel you should clean your joints prior to making your connections. And I'll demonstrate that in a second. And then so I use a smaller gauge solder, and don't tell the EPA or an environmentalist, but this is high lead concentrate solder. It's easier to work with, and I happen to have a roll of it that I bought years ago. And the only thing I will say, make sure that once you've worked with a lead-based solder is that you do wash your hands or even wear gloves while you're working with it, and don't eat it. As tasty as it might be, don't eat it. So we'll strip just a little bit. You don't want to strip any more than you need. I'm going to need a little bit more than that. And strip on both. This is stranded wire. I personally like working with solid wire. It's a little less flexible, but solid wire is actually a better conductor, believe it or not. So I like to just twist the wires so you don't have hairs sticking out all over, if you will. So then what I'll do is once I've got these cut and twisted, I'll just go ahead and dip them into the flux. This is a paste, so you know it'll pick some up on it, and then pick some up on both. And then using my solder stand here, I will then tin them. And for those of you who aren't familiar with electronics, tinning is just the process of taking some solder, putting it on. You do it multiple ways. You can tin it, and then you'll see it'll just flow right onto So what I'm going to do is I use a micro brush. And so even though these are copper pads and should be relatively clean, especially if you just bought these brand new, but regardless, a little bit of flux will help these be clean. I've just got them taped down to, actually this is a fast track switch template, but I like using it as a solder, nice metal plate for soldering. And I'll do the same. I'll use my soldering iron again. So I'll use a little bit of flux to tin the pad. I'm going to try and make sure you can see what I'm doing here. So just touch the soldering iron briefly and apply a little bit of solder. You get a nice ball there. You get a nice ball there. And you're good to go. So now to solder up the wires themselves, we know that yellow is the positive lead, the 12 volts, and 12 volts is on top here. So I'm going to try and, so you can see this, you want to heat up both kind of at the same time, and you can see why I kept this lead as short as possible. So there's a good joint. Now, in electronics world, a good solder joint should be shiny and it should be strong. Cold solder joint is going to be brittle and it's going to have more of a matte look to it. It's going to be a little bit crusted over, if you will. So after I solder things on, give it a tug, make sure that everything's okay. Because I'm just doing this for show purposes and I've already done the wiring that I've done, normally I would probably have trimmed these even shorter, and then I'd wrap one of them either in a heat shrink tubing or electrical tape to make sure that these 2 points can't short together. For this, I'm going to leave these as is, but I would recommend making sure that these can't get shorted when you're moving them around. Okay, so you've really done the hardest part. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Soldering isn't as bad as you might think. It does take some practice. You know, the only thing I can recommend is that too much heat can be a bad thing. You can either ruin things, you can actually lift the solder pad off of this and delaminate it. But, so the keys to soldering, good soldering, quickly get the solder in, heat the joint at the same time, and then come off. And you'll get the hang of it. In experimenting with things like this, they're inexpensive. You know, you're not going to ruin a $80 decoder trying to solder leads to it, you know, or something like that. So this is a great experiment. So, okay, so I just got a phone call and I talked for quite a bit. Now I don't know where I left off. So we're going to try and pick up. So we have our modified power supply with the bridged 12 volt or the turn on lead, which I think we reviewed. And so this is the Molex connector that I'm looking to connect to here. And so I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. We know that we've got everything wired up. This particular power supply doesn't have an on-off switch, so as soon as I plug it in, this is either going to blow up or it's going to turn on. And hey, it didn't explode. So as you can see, it's you don't need to worry about voltage regulation, adding resistors. These LED strips have them built in, so you provide 12 volts and they are resistor current limited, so there's no threat of overdriving them. As long as you're giving it a 12 volt supply, you're good to go. So this is 6 LEDs and you can see they're pretty bright. And so that's that. So I'll show you some installation examples, and again, you can do much more than I've done here. Some people like to hide them into an aluminum channel just to help diffuse the lights, but you can see I've just stuck them to a old 1x2 rather, and that's 2 strips. Provides quite a bit of light. Over my workbench, I actually have multiple strips. You can see them here. And for fill lighting, underneath, I've just stuck them to the bottom side of this shelf, which provides great fill lighting for this just shelf section in here. Well, that's LED lighting, LED strip lighting anyway. And I hope that that helps you a little bit. It maybe take the plunge. I know that this isn't a non-traditional or really a traditional throw up a couple of fixtures and wire them up. You need a little bit extra with a power supply of some sort. There are a lot of alternatives to this method. Some people use old laptop power supplies. A lot less. You don't have to do the turn on lead to ground. With a laptop power supply, they're just on. But any 12 volt power supply that you can get a hold of, even old wall warts, if you've got a a charger for something, and you know that it provides 12 volts, it's plenty. And like I said, they're resistor
protected, so they're current protected from over voltage or over current. So the strips themselves are pretty much foolproof. I wired all these up, and knock on wood, haven't had any of them blow up or destroy. I didn't do a amperage test on the power supplies to see how much they're drawing, but I've only got 2 strips in here, so total that would be 30 watts if I had all of them running, and I know I don't have all the strips connected, so plenty of overhead on those power supplies. So somebody's getting rid of a computer, hey, grab the power supply, toss the rest of it, you know, whatever, save that power supply. It could be useful for something else, and you're helping the environment, keeping it out of a landfill. So like I said, can't say that I'm back full-time every week all the time, but I'm hoping to be able to post here and there. I've gotten a lot done on the layout, so the next video I'm hoping to show you guys some of the new stuff that I've done. And one of the big things I'm going to show you real quick, which has been one of the things that I've been trying to do for years, was finally have a yard on the layout. So I'll give you a quick preview of that. But I'm going to say thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. For everybody who's asked where I was and asked me to come back, I really appreciate it. Hopefully I can start getting some more stuff out there and showing everybody what I'm working on. So thanks a lot.
I'll just give you a quick sneak peek of what I was working on most recently, and this is the yard, which I'm calling Shop's Yard. For those of you familiar with Wisconsin Central, it was one of their major yards up in Fond du Lac. The track is done. Obviously, backdrops need to be done. Wiring is done. I need a more permanent control panel eventually. A lot of switches had to be made for this, but I'll go into more detail in a follow-up video.